Greetings, Kerbonauts! This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 19 of Project Ares. We're still here on Galileo's Planet Pack, and last time we were launching another module up to Mars Station. This one has agroponics. Those little domes there contain plants or snack trees or something like that. And all we have to do is feed them fertilizer and mulch. The mulch is being generated automatically. The supplies are getting turned into mulch just over time. Combining that with fertilizer and those agroponics pods, we will get back new supplies, and that will extend our supplies out a very long time. Now, last time we already got all the habitation space we need. This time we're going to get all the supplies we need. After this, we will be able to do the 6 months in orbit that I had previously said I was targeting. It has been a very standard launch up to this point, and we just need to set up our rendezvous. We didn't launch exactly on the inclination that I would have liked. Either that or we were sort of tipping the wrong way during our launch, but it's not a problem. Once we get to orbit, we can set up a maneuver that will cause our ascending node to cross our close approach markers at the same time. Combine that as well with making our apoapsis on the same point, and that will create, of course, a very nice maneuver node that will allow us to line up our orbits and rendezvous with Mars Station. There it is in the background now. We are still operating on our final stage because the module itself does not have engines. It has RCS, and so I need to get really close before I decouple. The RCS doesn't have much power. I have a fair amount of RCS, just not a lot of power in those RCS nozzles. So after setting up our little rendezvous there where we're coming in within about 6 meters of our target, we can just fast forward a bit and slowly creep into position. Everything looks like it's going really well. However, I will let you in on a secret. I should have quick saved much earlier in this process than I actually did. But I'll let you take a look at it here before we have to deal with that. I did a bunch of rolling of the module, trying to figure out exactly how I wanted it to line up. I have big solar panels on it, and I want them to go a particular direction. Specifically, I want one heading toward the North Pole and one toward the South Pole, with the whole station oriented so that the core module is pointing down. I couldn't make up my mind for the longest time, but finally I did, and I settled it into place. You can see the RCS is firing like crazy, so I have to turn off the SAS to prevent it constantly firing all over the place, trying to stay steady. And right then, as I went to start docking it up and doing the retracting and everything, it crashed. And that took a long time to get into position, so rather than doing the entire thing over again from this save point where you can see that I decided to use the new tool in the debug menu that allows you to reposition a craft, and I selected to do a rendezvous. And just get us back over to Mars Station, it automatically drops you in 150 meters away from your target. The real pain in the butt on that process was scrolling through the list, getting past all of the asteroids. Apparently all of those are options too, and they don't have a scroll list, they have a little arrow list where you have to keep hitting it over and 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 over again, trying to get to your target. But eventually I did, and then I had to take it in that last 150 meters on my own, like a normal rendezvous and docking procedure. I was smarter this time and quick saved it right there, and then we have to use my 6 degrees of freedom mouse to fly over to the other side and start retracting and activating the docking ports, and just then, yeah, it crashed again. But luckily we had it saved exactly at the right point, and so reloading it this time is quite easy. And finally we retract the last docking port and activate the welding feature so the docking ports go away, the whole thing goes to being one huge craft again, and now we can focus on opening the solar panels that will operate the agroponics bay. There are 2 of them. They're quite big. They come out of the CX Aerospace mod, and they're normally used to replicate the ISS solar panels. They even have the cool hydraulic extensions. We have a couple of them set up on there, pretty much exactly the same way an ISS solar panel would be. And then after those have been extended, all I need to do now is rotate the ship so that I do have the one going up and the one going down. Now the reason why I want to do that is usually that gives you more access to the sun. Most of the time, a space station like this will be going horizontally along on its orbit. So by having your solar panels go up and down rather than left and right relative to that orbit, you get more access to the sun more often. Less is likely to block you. And really enjoying this free-flying mouse here. It gives me an opportunity to go in nice and close and move around, look at the different sides, look at the external pallets that will allow us to put equipment out there if necessary, go back and forth along the side of it, and then eventually we're going to take a look at the real functional stuff of it. We need to see how our life support is doing now. We need to check the electrical power, the habitation space, and the supply count, and make sure that I was right. And it does look like I was right. Everything is all squared away there. In a minute, I'll show you what the math was for that specifically. It'll be real quick. Now that I have our big solar panels, we don't need the little ones that were on the core module. We can bring those in and use them later as backups, but by having them in, we make sure that nothing will damage them when they're not being used. With that mission done, I can now take care of some house cleaning-like duties. The first one is I want to move another week or so ahead on the Talumo satellite. After we do that, I check in with the satellite that's scanning, the new one that's at Iota. We want to send that around the planet a couple times. I realize that I can't actually get new active scanning done from the tracking station, so we switch to the satellite instead and do our scanning there, and sure enough, that's making it function. So we can take a look at the map and see how well we're doing so far, look at some of the configuration values on the map as well. But it's still nowhere near ready to go, and so next I'm going to go and set up a maneuver node for the Talumo satellite to bring it in close to the planet and down over the North Pole. However, when I go to do that, we have some bad news. Just like what happens with a lot of satellites we send here from Earth, we have lost communications with the satellite. It has gone into, let's say, safe mode and is no longer sending back any data or telemetry to us. So we need to investigate what's going on there. I did want to make my burn right now, but we won't be able to do that if we can't establish communications. In fact, we'll fly right on by and never get any data about that anomaly, that potential distress signal, so we need to get this solved. Now we're going to go back into my real solar system install to catch up on what's happening with the Kerbals that had gone to the moon last episode. They're in the Mercury vessel, that's what we call that one. It's much bigger than the Mercury that you're used to. It's our transit vessel that is eventually supposed to be able to go back and forth between the moon and just take trips back and forth that way. We would keep adding fuel tanks in orbit to that vessel, using those to go off to the moon and then dump them and when we head back again. Well, our Kerbals have done all their investigation around the moon and they are ready to come home, so it's time to set up the maneuver node that will bring us back. Since we sort of came in on the same inclination that the Earth is relative to the moon, all we really have to do is go retrograde on our orbit, head backward in the direction that the moon, opposite the direction that the moon is traveling, and we'll get back to Earth. It's only going to take us roughly about 900 to 1000 delta V in order to make that return trip. We're going into the dark side now, going out of the sun. So in a moment we'll skip ahead to the maneuver node, but before we do, we just had to take a look at this. Look how they're just gliding along there, rotating to get a look at everything, look at the surface. Look at the stars. How beautiful is that? And then they make it around to the maneuver point and they start the engines. It's still a bit dark over here on this side of the moon, but you can see the engines are lit up. And we can see as our orbit begins to extend itself away from the moon, and soon we will be escaping its gravity, heading back to Earth. I'm pretty sure that I have more than drained the fuel tanks by the time I get done with this. It may have been a mistake. We won't know until we make it back to Earth. We can drop those empty fuel tanks to gain some extra delta V by losing mass, but when we get to Earth, that needs to have been enough that we can do a capture burn and bring our orbit back down so we can rendezvous with the space station there. Only time will tell on that one. But now with the escape burn complete, we can glide off for a nice, casual, leisurely trip back home. Or at least that's what the Kerbals thought.
This is Mercury 1 to Capcom, come in. Mercury 1 to Capcom, come in. This is Mercury 1 to Capcom, come in please. I can't get them. Where are they? I don't know. Check all the circuits. Wait, there's something up ahead. What is that? was that? Is everybody okay? Hey, wait. Where's Hadfield?
Alright, it is time to return to our view of the Tulumo satellite. Remember, we had lost communications with it. Well, I've done a little debugging, and the Kerbals have done a little debugging, and we've found out what the problem was. For some reason, all of a sudden my install started to believe that Remote Tech was installed. And this was causing it to remove the communications module from all of my communications parts. Well, at least for the ones that I had used on this satellite. So I disabled the config file that was believing we had Remote Tech installed, reloaded the game, and this time it didn't overwrite my modules. So essentially, down on the ground, the Kerbals have diagnosed the problem, they've re-established communication with the satellite, and now we're ready to do that mid-course correction that we had wanted to do previously but couldn't. We're going to bring the periapsis way down close to the planet, although then I realize I don't know exactly how high the atmosphere is. Although I figure using remote sensing technology, we should be able to determine an atmosphere altitude, and so I just use the in-game UI to represent the fact that the Kerbals could have figured that out. We notice that it's a very low, only 45 kilometers atmosphere altitude, and so we can continue bringing that periapsis down really close to the planet. Next up, if you remember, we had tried to reorient our Mars station over Gale here and bring up the orbit to a minimum of 200 kilometers at the periapsis, but we were sort of running a little bit low on fuel. The station needed new supplies. We need supplies to power the main engine on that crewed vehicle that we've been using to boost the station, and we needed a lot of monopropellant. But to bring up supplies to the station, I would like to have a special docking arm. And so that's what this launch is. We have a module in there that has 4 docking ports all around the edge of an arm, and at the top of it, an airlock. So this can also be the way that we can go out and do our EVAs to clear off the debris that we don't need anymore.
Nothing to see here. Please disperse. Nothing to see here, please.
For example, the exterior is loaded with RCS jets, but we don't need most of those. Once the supplies ship is brought up, it'll have a cargo bay that we can take all of those things and put them in there. Or actually, now that I come to think of it, doesn't MKS have a way to destroy parts in order to get materials or something like that? I'm going to have to look into that, because that would be a much easier way to remove those external RCS jets that I don't need anymore. What? My rocket flipped? No. What are you talking about? There was nothing to see there. Look, we're decoupling our lower stage. How could we be doing that if we had flipped our rocket over? And now you can see from the orbital view that I didn't bother waiting once again for the orbit of the station to come under. I'm just launching straight away. And I figure if I head a little bit south, then I'll eventually intersect the orbit of the station, at which point I can align myself. As long as we have enough delta V to do that, everything will be fine, and I'm pretty sure that we do, although we will soon find out. For now, we shall decouple the... what do you call that thing? That's the fairing! Yes! We shall decouple the fairing and expose the payload to space. That will allow us to take a good look at it. You might notice that I haven't been getting a lot of time to do VAB looks at these things, so you're just going to have to deal with looking at it here in orbit. And as the next stage drops away, we can see the final injection stage that will get us to the station, as well as the module attached up there. You can see it has the big airlock section on the top, and then a crew tube that goes down to a hub with a 4-way intersection of more docking ports. 2 of them are small. I figure those are going to be used for just refueling and supplies. Well, specifically refueling, actually, liquid things. And then the larger ones could be used for docking crew. Although I really only plan to have 1 more crew vessel docked up here, but technically I could have 2 more, or I could attach a supply ship to one of them and crew to the other. The one that we intend to use next, though, is one of those small ones, because remember I needed to bring up liquid fuel oxidizer and monopropellant. So under the hub, then going down, is another crew tube that will dock to the station. One thing I've learned when using these weldable docking nodes is if you have a little segment that sticks out, then it works a lot better to dock things together without seams. And so from now on, I'm going to do that for all of them. And speaking of little parts that stick out for those docking nodes that weld, that reminds me, I had a problem with my station. I was getting ready to launch this module, and when I went to go set the target, the space station was not in orbit. I checked the tracking station, and there was no space station in orbit. I saved my game a lot, so I was able to go back to a save file and get the station back, and it's also a good thing that I save a lot because the game likes to crash when I'm using these docking nodes that weld. But with a reload, I can bring it back. Now I've smartened up, and every time I'm about to dock one of these or I get really close to the station, I do a quick save. And it was through one of those saves that I was able to sort of get my station back again. I have a Git repo, and my save files are stored in there, and I was able to get a version that had a slightly older space station, and I had to do some hacking to get it back into the game, and so while I was at it, I decided to add little modules that stick up just a tiny bit, so that there wouldn't be any gaps anymore after welding two parts together. While I was at it, I fixed the ones that had already gotten misaligned. So now this space station is way better than even the original one. It's not technically the same one because of how I had to hack the save, but I wasn't going to allow the bug that somehow deleted an entire space station from my install from going on without fixing it. Sometimes I'll go along with it and I'll say, oh, I've got an anomaly or whatever, but not when I'm going to lose the entire Mars space station. Okay, so now here you have just seen me launch my new resupply vessel. This can carry liquid fuel, oxidizer, and monopropellant up to the station. It also has a cargo bay for putting in junk and returning it back to the planet, or really just burning it up, which is what's about to happen right here. This was not intentional.
Please disperse. Nothing to see here, please.
So let me try launching that one more time. You see, the problem I had was I forgot how weak the third stage engine is, and I went way past my apoapsis and just couldn't get enough altitude to keep it up. You see, the payload with all the fuel in there is kind of heavy, and that's why this launcher had to have 6 little boosters added to it. You could see they exploded when I decoupled them. They're just colliding with each other, or maybe they're overheating from the decoupler thrusters. But they don't do any serious damage to the craft, and so we just continue on. Once again, nothing to see here. Move along. This time around, we make it to orbit just fine. We are still a little bit past our apoapsis, but real life launches do that all the time. They go past apoapsis, but their orbit needs to be going so much faster. They have a lot more time before they need to deal with things like re-entry. It's much more punishing in Kerbal Space Program on a Kerbin-sized planet. But it's nothing unusual, and so that's what we go ahead and do. Just keeping the craft more angled this time to both maintain altitude as well as forward velocity. That solves the problem. Every now and then going back out to the map, taking a look at it, seeing where we are relative to our target, angling ourselves so that we can get our orbit pointed toward that orbit. Mars station is sitting there waiting for us, dying to get its hands on the fuel that we have. Now, rather than trying to wait for the station to really come into a nice position for me to rendezvous with it, I just did a burn straight toward it, and that took me through the top of the atmosphere here of Gale. You could even see in my trajectories mod there was a red line showing that I was skimming across the top of the atmosphere. But it didn't go too deep down into it. I was getting a little bit of drag as I went through, and I couldn't fast forward very fast. I compensated for the drag by simply using my RCS to boost us up just a little bit. If I lost some of my close approach, then I'd boost us a little bit more, until eventually we went through the atmosphere part. We were back just in space, and then I made my quick rendezvous. I don't know, maybe at the end of the day it would maybe have been better if I had just gone higher up so that I could have done a higher warp speed. But it was only a couple of minutes, and now, well, I dealt with it, no big deal. Once we were past, we could activate our communications just to make sure we don't lose comms. This is not a manned flight, this is just an unmanned supply flight. And from this point, it was fairly easy going. Rendezvousing, matching velocities, picking out which docking node I wanted to use, all very easy. The one I chose was in between the big solar panel and the station core, because I knew that the module was small and would fit in there, and if I wanted to bring something up later that used a small docking node, I could do it on the other side no matter how big it was. Now that did make it a little bit more challenging to slot ourselves into position here and make sure we don't collide with anything, but not really that hard. And then once connected to the station, I started my fuel transfers. First I looked for my TAC fuel balancer mod and then went, oh dear, I must not have installed it, or it's not up to date. I'm going to have to check the websites to see if it's up to date. But for now, since I'm here, rather than completely reloading to get to this point, I'll do it by hand. I'll just use the KSP interface transfer some of that fuel over, transfer monopropellant, make sure there's enough in the crewed vehicle attached down at the bottom, so that later when we need to do our deorbit burn, we can easily maneuver out away and do that burn. And then after that, our unmanned visit to the station here is complete. Although I don't want to get rid of that unmanned craft yet, I'm going to be filling up its cargo bay with trash that we can deorbit when it goes back. But first, the main reason we needed those supplies up here was so that we could reorient the station to make another prograde burn and boost us up to that 200-kilometer orbit that I had originally wanted. It's nice how with the welded modules together using those special docking ports, it doesn't wiggle around very much. So it's pretty easy to use the RCS to maneuver us into our position for that prograde burn. Get around to our apoapsis and just put a little bit of thrust on that main engine from the crewed vehicle, and we can use that to boost us some more. After a little while, it gets us up to the 200, at least 200 on our lowest part of our orbit. And so now I should be able to do the higher warp speed that you can get once you're above 150 kilometers. And that gives me a little bit of maneuvering room above and below in case I want to do some rendezvous maneuvers. But ultimately, once that is all done, I would really like to have that lower module where the crewed vehicle is docked, pointing down set toward the South Pole. The solar panels will reorient themselves again so that they go north and south and get the maximum exposure to the sun. And the other thing I want to do while I'm here is go out on my first EVA, take an engineer outside to pull away several of the bits that we aren't going to need, like those RCS jets that are useless at this point. But once I get out there, I realize it has been so long since I have used Kerbal Attachment System and Kerbal Inventory System that I don't actually know how it works anymore. I go to right-click on the part and I don't get the interface that I'm used to, and so I go and take a look at the actual instructions on how it's used these days, and I find out that in order to use it, you are required to have a power drill equipped, and I didn't even know that, so I didn't bring anything like that up to the station. So I'm going to have to do another launch. We were planning to bring up 4 Kerbals total anyway, so another crewed vehicle will bring the next 2, and when they come, they can bring some power drills in order to do these detachments. And then I can do all of that work, the EVA stuff, next time. So I guess that's going to do it for now, and until next time, I will see you later, Kerbonauts. You're still here? Okay, well, watch this staging test that I did with my airlock module earlier. Although it wasn't really supposed to be a staging test. It turned into that after I lost control. Enjoy.